So yeah, we're going to talk a bit about branding tonight. What is everybody's perception of what a brand is? Does anybody have Tim Hortons? So what about Tim Hortons as a brand? Yeah. So would you say you identified Tim Hortons as Canadian? No. You did? So a brand is more than just a name or a logo. A lot of times I'll refer or make the comparison to when you're dealing with a person, right? I guess most of you probably know Kyle at this point. If you had a conversation with Kyle, you'd know you were talking to Kyle. If you just heard his voice, you probably know that you were talking to Kyle. If you get to know him a lot and he types you an email, without looking at the subject line and just looking at the way he speaks, you might recognize him as Kyle, right? All those are pieces of Kyle's brand. His face is part of his brand. His name's part of his brand. All of that piles in to how you recognize him, to how you communicate with Kyle. And the same thing goes with Tim Hortons, right? You have interactions with Tim Hortons. When you walk in, it looks the same every time you go there. The staff look a certain way. The staff are taught to answer the phone a certain way, greet a customer a certain way, deal with customers in a certain way if there's an issue. The colors, the feel of it, anything that associates with Tim Hortons has a very unique feel. And that's really intentional. So there's a few pieces that go into it. One's your brand voice, and that's when you're communicating with people. And this is really one of the most important, right? And it's how you express yourself as a brand. And you have to think of it as you're giving your brand its own personality. And your brand talks a certain way at that point. And if you're a lawyer, your brand might talk the same as you do because you are your brand. If you're a t-shirt company, well, you want it to represent the ideals of that t-shirt company. You don't want it to just be yourself. And it's part of the thought that you want to put in when you're developing your company and when you're developing your brand is, what's your future plan for this? Am I always going to be the face of this brand? If so, if you're a real estate agent, your face will literally become a chunk of your brand. If you're a restaurant, you may want to sell it at some point. And if your face is the face of that restaurant, Wendy's has a face, right? Colonel Sanders is a face. They were made up, but at the same time, that's how they're recognized. And you can do that with a restaurant, but a lot of times you're going to want to pass it off to somebody who's not you. And they're going to want to adopt that personality. And you're going to want to give them all those tools to be able to do that through their voice, through how they speak. And you want it to be in a way that your customers can relate to. So you want your customers to be able to have a conversation with something that they like. If you happen to have a brand that speaks to younger people, you're going to want to converse in a similar language. If you have a brand that speaks to professionals, you're going to want to speak in a professional language. How you do this is you want to have a conversation with what your company is. What are the values of your company? Is charity going to be part of what your company is? Is green going to be part of what your company is? Are you an aggressive brand? Are you a friendly brand? And that's all part and parcel with the product that you want to sell and the demographic that you want to hit. And you really want to get in the shoes of your customers and say what would excite them and then what lasts, right? There's fad brands, things that, I'm going to sound old, but pet rock. There's things that were kind of cool for a little while when they disappear, right? MySpace, all of these types of things. You want your brand to have a lasting intention. So you don't want to just take what is current, unique, or special today, unless you want to be a fad brand. And then you want to look at what your competition's doing or not doing. Are they leaving a hole in the market? Is your competition talking to people in a certain way that alienates a certain segment of the population? If they do, there's a huge opportunity. And then, what's the language that you use? Is it extremely technical? Are you trying to sell to engineers, right? Are you trying to sell to somebody from a legal profession? You want to be on that same level. Whether what you're serving is that technical or not. So you could have a maid service and you want to sell your maid service to professionals. You're still going to want to talk in a very professional, high-level manner because you want people that are going to speak that way and feel comfortable speaking that way to want to hire you. And you want them to have that trust that you speak on the same level. Are you very formal or informal? If you're dealing with youth or you're dealing with people in their off time, you really want to think about that. And everybody's a different person throughout the day as well. So you want to think about when you're reaching people, right? If you're trying to talk to me when I'm at work, I want you to talk to me on a very professional level. I want you to respect my time. I want you to advertise to me in that way. If you call me up as a service and waste a lot of my time, I'm going to be really upset with you and I'll probably never deal with your company. Now, if you want to talk to me on my off time and it's something that I enjoy talking about, I may want to take my time, talk a little bit longer with you, get a little bit more interested in what you're doing. So you need to remember that, even if you were going after, say, a professional, if it's a professional's leisure activities, you want to talk to the leisure professional. And you want to develop your voice around how would that professional talk at his leisure time, right? What kind of slang do you use? Are you using industry terminologies? Are you using, again, when you get into slang, if you use certain words, you're going to date yourself. If I said hip or cool or, all of a sudden I'm the weird old guy. And, you have to be careful with that kind of language. The grammar you use, you don't always want it to be perfect if that's not the audience that you're speaking with. And then you have to make sure that that's repeatable. So you want to develop a guide. So you want to be able to communicate with your employees. How do we speak to the public? How do I answer the phone? How do I, sign off on an email? All of these are conversations that you should be thinking about as you kind of grow your audience, grow your the amount of people that are working with you. And you want that to be consistent across all of your marketing material. Most of you guys are startup, so that's not really as relevant. But you want to make sure that your employees buy into it as well. So you want them to be involved in some of this process. So if you're hiring people on or as you take people on, you want to explain to them and get them excited about who you are. You don't want somebody that's just coming to work for the job. You want them coming to work because they like what you do and they agree with your philosophies on, environment, green, all of anything that, ties into what you've decided your brand is. A few examples, Big Ass Fans. These guys are hilarious. They're a company, we actually met them out of Southern Ontario. The guy literally had, I think he was working in air conditioning or something, and he literally had a friend call him up and said, I need like a huge fan. So the guy made him a huge fan. He's like, no, I need a big ass fan, right? So he said, here's your big ass fan. He put a big stamp on it and made a big joke out of it. This brand's huge now. They sell around the world. And what they did was they took that joke and they just kept going with it. When you go on to their website, the colors of the fans that you can buy always have fun names like Back in Black or Hippie Green. Or it's all part of the fun brand that they've had because they've developed in a way that they realize that most of their audience is probably going to be industrial guys that don't take themselves too seriously, that are going to be in on the joke with this company. Starbucks. massive coffee chain. They're generally, if you were to go out and do a blind taste test, Starbucks never really rates fantastic. They rate kind of top average, right? Quite often they'll be compared close to like any of the other type of chain coffee stores. But they get amazing prices for their coffee, and they're dominant in the industry. Starbucks grew across North America, and they did this by having a consistent brand and telling people that they were really good coffee. They went out and they told an amazing story about their brand. That, you know, it was based in Seattle, and it was the Seattle roast, which, you know, a lot of coffee snobs think is burnt coffee. But they told the story in a way that people were like, that must be really good coffee. There's been studies done that your taste buds are actually changed by your expectations. So they've taken the same cup of coffee and they'll put it on a tray and they'll bring it out to somebody and have them taste it. They'll put another cup of coffee, exact same cup of coffee, and they'll put it with some orange peels and some spices next to it, and they'll bring it to the person, they'll put it down, not in any way that the person can smell those spices, but enough that they can see them, and they'll rank the second cup of coffee much higher than the first one. And they've done neurological studies where they've actually measured the brain waves of people, given them the same cup of coffee, put it in a different cup, and they literally thought it tasted different. Their brain told them that it was a different cup of coffee. And that's how powerful the brand was. So, you know, if you have that ability to do that with a story, that's what you need to do for your company. You need to tell a story that makes people like you. Apple's another similar story. Apple makes computers that are really costly in comparison to their performance. I use an Apple. I know that I could buy a PC that probably has more power than my Apple for less money. But their marketing sucked me in. I'm an Apple user. Are they? Right? And so this is the thing, right? So they've given me enough faith in their brand that I've gone out and I bought an Apple computer, and I've probably spent a 20, 30, 40% markup additional to what I could have gotten in a PC. I live in the Apple ecosystem now. I've bought into the software, so now I'm stuck with Apple. But at the same time, I went out and bought it. My whole office uses Apple. And it's because they told a really good story. A story to the point where, as a design agency and as a marketing agency, if I showed up with a PC, a lot of my customers would say, what are you doing here? Because most design agencies and most advertising agencies use Apple. And they've told that story in such a great way that it's almost part of my business now. It's almost part of who you are as an advertising agency. Starbucks story was your local coffee shop. If you go into any Starbucks across the world, they don't look the same. If I go to the one in Kleinburg, it looks like a cute little hut. It's a cottagey feel, but it feels exactly like downtown Kleinburg. It feels like the local coffee shop in Kleinburg should look like. If I go to Times Square, it looks like I'm in a Broadway theater. And everything about it looks like it belongs in Times Square. Their brand story is that we belong here, that we're your local coffee store. And they bring you in with that because it's part of the atmosphere of where you are right now. It's part of your local identity if they're in your neighborhood. That Starbucks is part of who you are. Apple did the exact opposite. Apple went out and said, we're going to make a ton of devices and we're going to make them all look the same. They come in one of three colors. That's kind of a recent advancement for Apple. For a long time, it was this steel black and a nice shiny screen. And that was all you got, maybe an apple on the back in either white or black. Now you can get rose gold. That's the extent. If I hand you a device and I cover up the apple, you're probably going to still know that it's an Apple device. They are high design. That is the methodology that they want, that they're trying to tell people. That's their story. So when you're developing your brand, you need to ask yourself, who am I? Who am I going to be, right? When Apple became Apple, they didn't necessarily know that they were going to become the massive conglomerate that they are. They hoped they would. They didn't know they'd be getting into phones. They didn't know that an iPod would exist in the world. They knew that they were going to be a design tech company, and they made themselves that way. When Starbucks started, it was a small coffee shop in Seattle. You can still go to the original Starbucks, and it's a tiny shack of a store in Seattle. I've been there, and there's a lineup that's probably 80 people long to get in any day of the week, all day long. No. Did you? You just... Yeah. They've told you that good of a story. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And it's funny because when you go around Seattle, jokingly, I asked somebody down the street, and I'm like, where can I get a good cup of coffee? I'm like, oh, there's this really good local place around the joint. I don't know if you've heard of them. They've got like a few locations. They got like this green mermaid logo. And he just kept going right down and it was beautiful. But it's because they've told them this amazing story of, you're going to get a special experience when you come to Starbucks. What's interesting about Starbucks right now is because the coffee snob world, I guess, isn't as appealed to Starbucks anymore. Starbucks has realized this. So they've got the Starbucks brand, and then they started doing things like Frappuccinos. And then it moved into this unicorn Frappuccino, which is like a weird pink milkshake, tie-dye, bizarre beverage that anybody that sees themselves as a coffee person would immediately reject, right? That's not part of my coffee culture. You are not coffee anymore. And that's what happened. They started getting pushed aside. And this unicorn latte was actually part of a branding exercise for them. So they've developed another brand called Starbucks Reserve. And Starbucks Reserve roasts its own coffee in-house. It's got a kind of brassy logo to it that doesn't have the mermaid on it. It's just S and a star. And they're developing that as their new coffee premium brand. So if you go into a Starbucks Reserve store, the one in Seattle has people that they've brought in from their top Starbucks around the world to serve you coffee and make premium coffee drinks better than anybody else can make a premium coffee drink. They mix their own coffee blends right in the store, and they're telling a new story. And they've cleaved their brand. And they said, we have Starbucks Reserve, which satisfies the best coffee lovers out there. And now we put this unicorn latte on the other Starbucks brand to say we're the fun Starbucks. We're the Starbucks that you come in and you have your treat drink, and you can have a milkshake and pretend it's coffee, right? And they've cleaved it because they realize you can't have both. You can't tell both stories, right? You can't tell I'm the fun everything brand and I'm the really big expert at the same time, because people stop believing the story. So they separated it out. Are there any questions? Questions? Where are you guys at in your startup phase? Do you guys have an actual product or service that you're ready to start with? Trying to develop one? What are you trying, where are you headed? Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Mhm. So right there, you've already identified one brand challenge, right? The restaurants are going to be somewhat of a consumer of yours, right? So you want to make sure that when you're developing the brand assets around it, that it's something that adds to the restaurant, because you want them to want you, right? You want them to want you to come in. So, the fact that you want it to be the fact that they're on your tour, that's probably a good restaurant to go to, right? So that's part of what you're going to want to incorporate when you're considering your brand. The next thing that's pretty obvious is you want people that are interested in new food experiences, right? So you want to find ways, how can I provide a new food experience? How can I take it above what they could get off the street? And that's part of your relationship with the restaurants. Can you provide something that's not on your menu? Can you do something that's a little bit different or special for the audience? And a lot of those restaurants are probably interested in that. Mm-hmm. Awesome. My other hat is chair of downtown Sudbury, so thank you very much, because that's spectacular. And I always love to see that kind of traffic, and you should probably talk to us at some point about that as well, because we'd be happy to promote it. Yeah. So I can do some of that for you. What I always tell clients, especially in the startup phase, is branding will cost you money, and actually no, branding will cost you, right? It's either going to cost you money or time. Um, Someone like us that does a lot of logos and brands and stuff like that can probably get it out and get something that fits your market a little bit quicker than you can. There's lots of brands out there that were drawn on sketches by companies that have done extremely well. And that happens for sure, and it happens a lot. Most companies, when they start up, don't have a lot of funds. You take something like the Tim Hortons logo, it's basically a script, right? It's nothing too amazing. And sometimes you want a brand that's simple, sometimes you want one that's complex. But a big part of what you're going to want to do is put the time in for your brand. Have that, discussion with some people that that might be your type of clientele, and say, what are the things that interest you in about what I'm doing? What excites you about what I'm doing? What should I be adding to what I'm doing, right? And in that conversation, try and dig more out than just the executables, right? Yeah, there is, right? And a logo is part of a brand. Having the first part, but what are the feelings? Who am I trying to attract? A lot of that legwork, if you have that when you come see somebody like me, I can do a brand for you pretty cheap, right? If I have to spend a lot of time with you deciphering a lot of that, and I'm not going to lie, there's value to doing it with me, because I'm going to do some of the research for you, and I'll probably ask some questions that you might not have thought of. But the reality is there's a cost to that, and as a startup, there's generally funds or reality, right? And having dealt with probably over 1,000 businesses in Sudbury at this point, I realize everybody's on a different part of that spectrum right now. And when you're in startup mode, you have more time than once you get going. And there's things that are repairable to a brand, and there's things that you live with, right? We worked for, it's fine now because they've sold MTI. They're a local mining technology company. Their logo is one of those designed on a napkin. And they had some issues with their logo and usability problems with their logo, and they couldn't put it on certain things. But the reality was it was also welded on machinery all around the world. So it was literally part of a machine sitting in mines in different parts of the globe, and there was no way I was going to change that logo, right? So there was very little that we could do around the logo to make the modifications to it. Meanwhile, they were still a successful brand, right? People interacted well with them, they did good things. So we made some modifications, and we did it in a way that that brand was still representative. They weren't, we weren't able to take the logo from a place where they were like, you know, this was the thing that we did on a napkin to something I don't recognize anymore, and we didn't want to do that, right? We wanted people still to recognize that brand. And when you do things as a startup and get those kind of initial things down, that'll be part of that process, right? You're going to commit yourselves to certain things, that this is how people know me now. And then you make small modifications going forward. And sometimes you want to invest in that design up front because the clientele you're going to have is really going to care about it. If you want to be the next Apple and you want your clients to be design focused and the people that you're talking to are telling you design is really important to need purchasing from you, then you better come see somebody like us to have that bigger design, right? If you know if you're a cupcake shop, right? You might want to invest more time in making sure your cupcake's really damn good, right? And there's always going to be that scale because that cupcake being really, really good is going to be part of your brand. That's going to be part of the interaction somebody had with you. It's going to be part of that process. So there's product development and there's brand development, and it all goes together. So you have to kind of have that conversation with yourself about how far can I develop the brand on my own? Is that enough to be better than my competitors in this sector or to compete with my competitors in this sector? So that's a really long answer to can I help you? But we'll definitely sit down, talk with you, kind of go through some of your needs if you need it. And then we'll direct you in the way that we think is most valuable to you at that time. Because sometimes it's us, sometimes it's you doing some things on your own, sometimes it's a mix. Any other questions? Any other businesses? I might be able to help you move a little bit. Oh, nice. Yep. So are you cultivating? Are you picking? Are you? Okay, awesome. Yeah. I'm a bit of a foodie, so I'll be a client. So my family lives on the West Coast, and my wife always gives me shit because I pack wild mushrooms from BC into my bags, and she's like, one of these days, like, you know, massive bags of dried mushrooms in your suitcase, somebody's going to start asking questions. They are all gourmet mushrooms. I like to make risotto right to the camera. It's just more, will I get a longer time at airport security? So yeah, cultivated mushrooms, it's not something that's happening in Sudbury right now as far as I know. Manitoulin? Okay. All right. And is there like a freshness difference? Like how long, what's the shelf life of a mushroom? Okay. Okay, so you'll have a bit of an advantage over. Nice. So for you, you're looking at B2B. So there's a couple ways you can look at your brand. One is if the restaurants that are using it aren't going to want to talk about you, right? They're just going to want to put it in their dish and they want the best dish possible. You want a brand that they feel is reliable, right? That you're going to deliver on time, quality product every time. And I actually spent a lot of time in the restaurant industry, so I have some background with food ordering and things like that. And the biggest things they're going to be concerned about is reliability, right? Is it going to be good? Is it going to be consistently good? And are you going to get it here on time? The second option you have is branding through your company. And you don't see a lot of it in the food scene in Sudbury, but you do see it in other areas. We saw it a lot in Seattle. I've seen that in Vancouver. Toronto, it's starting to pop up more and more. Well, you actually see the farm name that produced an item on the menu, directly on the menu. So that you're producing in a way that people are like, oh, I really want that product because it's a boutique product and I can't get it, right? I know when you're in Seattle, there was a line of cider that we had. We went looking for it in liquor stores, we went looking for it everywhere to bring it back home. They do not sell to anybody except for restaurants. And they promote the hell out of it, and it's a really good brand, it was really unique, and we really liked it. But you have to go to the restaurant to get it, and the restaurant loves it, right? Because if I want to have this, I have to go to a restaurant. I can't just buy it through retail, right? So it's this premium brand that's just out of my reach all the time. But I still want it, and I'm still gonna go find a way to get it, right? So you have both of those options, and both can be successful, because if you can develop a product that those restaurants can then sell as this is something unique that, you know, isn't necessarily available off the shelf, and we're doing something better than what you can make at home, those are all things that can go into your brand. So those are two kind of options that you can kind of look at for where you set yourself. Anyone else? Okay. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. So NORCAT's the name that's known, right? That's the strength of your brand. I know the Innovation Mill logo fairly well, and it definitely takes from the NORCAT brand. When I see it, I know it's part of NORCAT. When you hear the name in the community, you might not make that connection, though, right? There's visual cues that tie them together, but there's not necessarily that community knowledge that those go together. The NORCAT brand is strong in the community. I think for the most part, people know it exists, know it's a positive thing, but I don't think everybody knows what it is. There's some issues around, is NORCAT a mining type government thing that kind of works there, right? Your location's a bit off the beaten path, so the general public's interactions with you are somewhat limited because of that. When you guys are in the community, you do a really good job of communicating with people. The NORCAT social media does a really good job of innovating with people. But that tie-in between NORCAT and the Innovation Mill is a double-edged sword. Because there's some brand confusion, in my opinion, about what NORCAT is in the community, if you connect it to Innovation Mill, you're connecting the brand confusion, right? So you guys do a lot here, right? You do a lot of technical training, which I think if you're in those fields, that's your knowledge of NORCAT, right? If I'm getting safety training and I'm getting it at NORCAT, my experience with NORCAT is it's safety training, right? and I'm going to carry some of that when I see the Innovation Mill brand. So I think, but there's a quality aspect to it where I don't think anybody in the community thinks of NORCAT as anything but good quality, right? There's a little bit of a feral to the quality, right? So the Innovation Mill brand carries so much more, right? And it does so many. It's a little bit more specific in its actions, but it's wider spread in its market. It would be important, I think, for it to have its own voice on social media, probably its own website, different things like that, with a sub-brand of NORCAT to it. So Innovation Mill by NORCAT or that type of connection. It would go a long way to being able to separate it, but use the stepping stone that's available to you, and attract a wider audience to what you guys are doing. Anyone else? I can dance for a while, which is always good for the internet. Kyle again. So success is always an odd one because one of the most successful brands we worked with doesn't exist anymore, MTI, right? Because they got to sell their company and they made a lot of money. So to them, that was a massive success. CoverGals has done quite well. They're a national brand at this point. They make coveralls for women. They're a niche brand, so they're not necessarily a household name, but they're well known in the sector that they work in. She ended up on Dragon's Den. She got a deal. Ended up not taking the deal because her brand was is well known enough at that point from the exposure that she was able to garner off those experiences, that she didn't need the money that came with the deal. So why give up the equity? On fun projects, I like them all. I'm a bit of a masochist, so some of the projects I like the most are ones I can't talk about because they're when something went really wrong with something and somebody gave me a call and, help work us out of this issue. And those are ones that I really enjoy personally working on because they're a more, I guess, sensitive, unique problem to that company. I like working on things where somebody's doing really new, unique things. So the project I always like working on the most is the one I'm doing right now, which sometimes I can't talk about because they haven't released yet. But we work on a lot of projects where people have new, unique ideas that are looking at expanding wide. And actually that brings a good point from some of the other, last time I did this presentation, somebody was talking about, my brand's a really unique thing, right? There's not a lot of people in town that are gonna really understand it. And that doesn't really matter anymore, right? If you have an idea and it's really cool, you can be a global brand. You don't need massive amounts of money to be a global brand anymore. You just need to know how to talk to the right people and tell the right story. Not a client of ours, but a really good local success story is Kinkajou. And if you haven't heard of them, they're a company that cuts bottles in half. And you can turn it into a cup, or you can turn it into a light, or you can do different things with it, right? They've found different unique ways of dealing with these bottles that are cut in half. And they've literally sold millions of units. And if I went around the room and said, who has a use for something that cuts a bottle in half, I might not get anybody, right? It's not something that everybody needs. But now that brand has sub-brands or sub-products to the Kinkajou bottle cutter, he's got a thing where you can slap a stopper in the bottom so the top half of the bottle becomes a wine glass. He's got all these different unique little spin-offs that he's done because he found this DIY crowd out there and he told a really good story, right? He was the kind of guy that didn't like to throw out his case of beer and wanted to turn it into something else. And his audience connected with it because they were like him. They wanted that same type of DIY advantage. And by doing that and telling the story in such a compelling way, he threw it up on Kickstarter and he crushed his goal. And I think he collected over $1 million on his Kickstarter startup and he needed 50,000. And it all came out of telling a really good story. And at the end of the day, that's what you all need to do. You need to tell a good story. What's our story? So we are what fuels your business, right? We're the passion behind your business. We're where you go to add that spice that helps you get that story across to the rest of the world. So we take your passion and we add the fuel to it so that the world knows. That's our story. Our start's interesting. So I started a company that was actually called MacIntyre Social Media, and it was just helping people start up their social media. And I worked with several of the mining companies in town and different firms that when social media was young and fresh, didn't necessarily know how to interact with it well, and I helped them with that. And my now partner, Deborah Sauve, had started a design agency called Fuel Multimedia. And we ended up having a lot of the same clients. Because my clients were large, they were also able to be very dictative with their payment terms. So, I would be on 180 payment terms with some of my clients and stuff like that. So then I'd have to pay Deb the bill out of pocket. One day, Deb just said, "I'm hostile taking over your company. You're going to become part of Fuel Multimedia," and then we started dating. So that's how Fuel Multimedia got its start. But we were able to combine really well. And the unique thing about our company, and as we've added employees and we've added partners and we've added things to it, is we're people that don't agree all the time. And the best projects come when we hate each other for like at least 20 minutes. Because we'll fight, right? We'll fight for, well, this is what really matters to telling the story, or this is what really matters to the visual, or this is what matters to the functionality of a website. We have those kind of internal battles to the point that we all kind of go, oh my God, that's way better, right? It was way better than the starting point of where any of us were. And we're very big advocates for our clients. And we really like working with things that are new, unique, or people that have big ambition. If you want to develop something that's going to be amazing, and you have that excitement, I want to fuel that excitement. I want to make it even better. I get excited by the excitement of our clients. Does that answer? Been in business for 6 years. 7 years. What's that? Am I a millionaire? I am not a millionaire. The one thing you'll learn about business is you need to reinvest all the time. So the better my clients get, the more I have to reinvest back into the business to be able to serve the next tier of client. So we started out with just marketing and design. We have programmers now. We have other designers. We have designers specializing in user interface and user experience. And while that means our sales go up every year, it also means that we need to retrain, bring in new people, and redevelop. And we're accessing bigger and bigger clients all the time. But as part of that methodology, you put in more time, you reinvest, and at some point you either level out or you partner out, and that's where your investment comes back. So we've got clients in the States, we've got clients across Canada. We are still based in Sudbury. We've got partnership firms in programming, in print across North America that we work with. We do some white labeling for other firms. So a firm that might be really good at programming will come to us and we'll do all their front end work, so we'll make it look good. We'll tell kind of the marketing story for it. We do a little bit of back end white labeling, so the opposite. Somebody that's good at design but can't necessarily put together the programming side of it. We'll do the back end work, so we'll make that website or that app function for them. We do white labeling for Google Apps marketing, so Google AdWords marketing. So if you want to advertise social media, online, any kind of digital platform, we help people with that, both our clients and clients of our clients. But yeah, we've had pretty good growth. Jeff MacIntyre. So yeah. A lot of our clients are industrial. That's part of growing up Sudbury, is you get kind of, there's a certain knowledge being next to it, right? Being next to the mining and understanding the culture of industry that I think Fuel has that a firm in Toronto might not. And because of that, we'll get jobs across North America, because when I pick up the phone and I talk to somebody, I know how to have that conversation. I know how to tell their story a little bit better. So it's our Sudbury advantage. I talk to people all the time. I go down to Mine Expo once every 4 years. It's this huge mining conference. And it's the coolest thing to do as a Sudburian, is you go and you got your name badge, and it says your company name, and then it says the city you're from. And you will literally have people stop you in the elevator and be like, "Oh, you're from Sudbury?" And they're from like Abu Dhabi or Kazakhstan or Australia. You're like, it's like you're from Hollywood and you're an actor, right? Like it's that same kind of feeling, and you don't recognize it as a Sudburian. We don't do enough as a city to sell that brand of we're a superstar on a certain level, right? And tell that story of, you know, we're a global star here, right? And it's part of the same kind of feeling that you should be able to do with your business. You are the best here, right? This is the part of the world, the story that we do better than anybody else. And if you can't find that we do better than anybody else, you're going to have a hard time as a business. And that's where you find your story. Yep. So we've got 3 brand colors. There's red, blue, green. So green's our design color, red's marketing, and blue is programming. And we did that for a few reasons. One is if you mix red, blue, and green as light, it can be any color you want. So you can, those are your primary light colors, right? Your TV is red, blue, green. So because we are the kind of thing behind your business, that red, blue, green lets us morph, right, into anything that we need to be for you. And it's also because we have very distinct chunks to our business. We have the marketing, we have the design, and we have the programming that all kind of live separately, but work really well together. You look like you have a question. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great story for color is Nahad Neshi. He's mayor of Calgary. And he actually went out and he looked at every election sign. He called all the signage companies and said, what color isn't being used? So it ended up being purple. Nobody, and even if you think about it here, like nobody uses purple as an election sign, right? So he uses purple as an election sign. So as he develops his whole thing and all of this kind of stuff, one of his campaign managers Googles that purple's the hot color of the season. So goes on Twitter and says, if you support Nahad, wear purple tomorrow. Of course, it's the hot color of the season, so everybody's out in purple. TV picks it up and goes, all these people are flooding the Neshi bandwagon. And he went from the guy that was the outside pick to becoming the mayor of Calgary. And I think he was like fourth down the line when that started. And it was almost a bit of a bluff where, you know, they went out and said, and some people wore purple intentionally, but a lot of people just happened to wear purple that day. And gave the story and the belief that he was a main player in the election. So color does matter. There's different unique ways that you can feel it. There is a lot of color theory. My partner, Deb, is masterful when it comes to colors and fonts. There is a lot of psychology behind the fonts that you use as well. Different fonts read modern, classic, all of that kind of plays together. She'd do a better job of explaining the niches of that than I would. And same thing with colors. Each color kind of has some psychological effects for people, feelings that it imbues to people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's quite a bit to it. So what about you guys? What are you? Okay, awesome. Nick, what are you up to these days? Okay, awesome. Okay, yeah. So Mick works in the outdoor furniture space. Um, you know, it's a unique space for a brand because in a lot of ways you go away from people for half the year and then you come back and you go away and you come back, which is a unique challenge, right? To stay top of mind for people when they don't care. When you're trying to sell a product to somebody at a time that they don't really care about the product, it's really hard to get that message through. So you need to find unique ways to stay relevant or stay exciting when it's not there. Some brands that do it well are Corona, Coppertone. Corona's kind of the summer beer. During the winter, they'll make advertisements with guys on a beach chair with snow around them, that type of stuff. So bringing back some of that summer excitement and getting you kind of enticed into the next year. Yourselves? Sounds good. We're on Durham Street. So across from Oscar's Grill, upstairs from where Copy is. Yeah. 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 Another branding story. So we actually chose a street front location on Elm Street downtown when we started because we knew nobody knew who we were. So we made that marketing investment to make a heavy play into an area where we'd be seen by a lot of people. So we located right on the middle of Elm Street. lots of traffic by. We used to light our our storefront up at night because in Sudbury it's dark at 4 o'clock and most people are driving home with pitch black in the evening. So we saw that as an opportunity in the winter. So we did our windows up in a way that we could light it and make it interesting and unique for people that were passing by, switching between our colors of red, blue, green. But that was one of those initial points where we went, this is going to stretch our budget, but it's going to put us into a field that otherwise people wouldn't have perceived us to be. We were able to immediately get into a higher level of client because we stepped out in a way that people went, they're serious about their business. They're stable. They've got a storefront retail place. So that was part of our branding. So we weren't on Dragon's Den, a client was on Dragon's Den. So our client was on Dragon's Den. So CoverGirls? Yes, so yeah, we were, yeah. So we did end up, I think we were folding t-shirts for her in the ad. Yeah. It was upsetting because the cameraman stood behind me, and that was the first time that I felt that I was balding because I had never seen the back of my head. So I went, oh no, something's going wrong back there. All right. Anything? Yep. It's a grind. One of the coolest things about our job is all I do is deal with entrepreneurs, right? Everybody that I deal with is an entrepreneur. And it's hard. At a certain point, you're going to smile and say things are better than they are. And you're going to be able to make your own decisions in life. You're going to be able to chart your own future. You're going to be able to be proud of what you do every day. And you're going to be able to make those decisions for you. The one thing every entrepreneur should do on a regular basis is write their own job ad. If I was going to hire for the position that I actually do every day, what would that job ad look like? Because you're going to find a lot of perks that you'll never find anywhere else. I decide when I get up. I decide when I go to work. I make my schedule. I decide when my holidays are. I decide who my clients are. There's a lot of those things that when you start listing them, all of a sudden, trying to ever find that job in the work world is brutal, right? It's not going to happen. And there'll be times where business is amazing. There'll be times where business is tight. And there'll be everything in between. And everything that you're going through, every entrepreneur is going through. It's a lot like the social media feeds of your friends. And nobody posts the shitty day they're having on the couch, but they show their vacation to Mexico, right? And that's the day of an entrepreneur every day, right? If you're having great things, you talk about it, and you're to the moon excited. And you don't talk about the bad days, and you work through them, and you find solutions, and you find ways to deal with it. But for the most part, it's amazing, right? And if you stick with it, and you stick through the hard times, which in your first 3-4 years, there'll be a lot. And then in your next few years, there'll be a lot less. And then your next few years, there'll be a lot less. And as long as you're continuing to reinvest and continuing to rebuild and continuing to stay fresh, those things will continue to expand and life will continue to improve for your business. And you'll be happier and happier with it because you've created something that's you. And it's almost like having a child where it's out in the world and it's got its own life at a certain point. And the dream of most entrepreneurs by the time they're 20%, 30% through their business is being able to sell their business at some point. so that it can have a second life, right, in somebody else's hands, and that it becomes more than just what they created, and somebody else adds a new spin to it, or those types of things. So it's an amazing thing to be able to do, and an amazing thing to be able to create.
Great. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks.